My name is Sarai, and I am here to introduce the Right Reverend Carol Gallagher. The Right Reverend Dr. Carol Gallagher is a member of the Cherokee tribe and serves as regional canon in the Diocese of Massachusetts. Her most recent writing can be found in Corning Full Circle, Constructing Native Christian Theology. Her most recent book is Family Theology, and her first book, Reweaving the Sacred, focused on congregational development. She was honored as a Proctor Fellow at EDS and with a Louisville Institute grant. She has served as Assistant Bishop in the Diocese of Newark and as Bishop Suffragan in the Diocese of Southern Virginia. Everyone, please join me in welcoming the Right Reverend Dr. Carol Gallagher.
Thank you. Wado. In my language, we say wado. And like listening to Cecilia, I kind of feel somewhat shy, but we're going to do a different kind of theological journey this evening, and I hope that you'll be patient with me as we do this. Because in front of me, and for the folks streaming, you may not be able to see it, but what I have in front of me is a way to tell a story for me that is very tactile and visual. What I've learned from my elders, from my family, is that there are many ways that we tell our theological stories, our family history, and mine is laid out here. This is my mother's tear dress on a Cherokee. It's our traditional, at least at this point, a regalia. The shoulders and sleeves are adorned in ribbons. The tear dress, some people think is a tear dress, but in fact, before the Trail of Tears, our women would tear the calico, and that's why it's called a tear dress, so that it has lots of layers. My older daughter, who's worn mine, or my mother's, at various different gatherings will say, I look like a pilgrim. But, you know, it is what it is. And in front of, and you can look at it later, is a picture of my dad and mom in 1942. My dad came here for seminary. My dad was a Presbyterian minister and a Navy chaplain, so I'm a PK. And there's actually a copy of his graduation from Princeton in 1943. When my dad came to this campus in 1940, I guess. He came from a place some of you might have heard of called Bob Jones College. Later on, when he became a Presbyterian minister, they removed him from the Alumni Association because he was too liberal. Just saying. My mother's maiden name is Walking Stick, Betty Walking Stick, or Woody Odenisti. And so they were married between my father's second and third year in seminary. And those were very different years in this place. It was obviously all male. And they had eating clubs. I mean, the university still has them, but the seminary had them. Did you know that? Oh, there you go. Well, anyway, so they were fascinated with my mother and, you know, oh, when are you going to bring your Indian princess here? When they were just totally taken with the idea of my father marrying this native woman. So we've lived our lives as mixed-race children, as Cherokees. We are both matriarchal and matrilineal. I sometimes say I come from a long line of bossy women, but many of our East Coast tribes were matriarchal and matrilineal, and many of our tribes throughout this country were. And so our women were often leaders in various different ways, and we have history of having women who are warriors. But our people came out of the area in North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, what we now call the Great Smoky Mountains. And we have, my family is in Oklahoma. My mother was born in Muskogee. But we have moved because of the federal government, and some of you know that story of the Trail of Tears. But I want to tell you a little bit about the creation story and then how my story weaves into it. In Cherokee tradition, the animals were gathered in the sky arch above what was basically a vast water. Cecilia talked about the fact that we're all water. Owl talked about the fact that we're all water. Native people understand the power of water. I had the opportunity to go and stand with folks in North Dakota and talk about water and the sacredness of that place and where they were trying to run a pipeline through. But anyway, the sky arch was getting crowded. And so there was a conversation among the various different beings, because many of our traditional people do not consider humans to be the only living beings on this earth, but everything is living, rocks, trees. And so, but it was getting crowded and they were having issues, okay? There were conversations, probably heated ones. They decided that they needed to do something. So they sent down a beetle with a filament that hung onto him. And as he dropped down, or she dropped down, I'm never sure, because the stories are different according to who tells it, they would pull up the water and pull the dirt through the water and pull the earth back up through the water. And it went on and on and on. But the problem was just the earth was still very damp and moist. And so they couldn't come down and inhabit it because it was too squishy, too messy. So then they had another long conversation like you do. And they finally decided that they'd send the turkey buzzard. Now, because the turkey buzzard has enormous wings, the turkey buzzard could move over the water and the land and flap the wings and dry out the land. And the story is told that that's why the Great Smoky Mountains were created, because the turkey buzzard got tired. And so those indications on the mountains are the wings in his tired state. And so then they all came down the filament to take their place on this earth. Most of our native stories in this continent either have stories from coming above or stories coming out of the ground. And any of you who are biblical scholars, particularly if you are scholars of Old Testament, will know there are two creation stories. And where did it come from? Either out of the sky or out of the ground. I don't like to get too much into preaching, but, we're often thought of as, pagans, or what our traditions are not Christian. But in fact, even within our Old Testament, there were multiple tribes with different stories. And they could abide having multiple stories of creation. And yet oftentimes, we codify things as theologians, students in Western education, and force us to think only one way, or to be only one way, or to learn only one way. So part of my reflection with you tonight is about the fact that we are on a journey, all of us, and many of you who are in some sort of process studying here, know that you have had moments of, what is God doing with me? And you have had moments when you thought, I can't do this. Well, maybe not you, but I have anyway. or this is just too difficult or strange, or they don't see me here. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about my story. I am a PK, interesting enough, preacher's kid, and I had a sense of call when I was 5 or 6 years old, and I thought I would, grow up and be like my daddy, but I didn't know any women who were clergy. We're talking about it in the 50s and early 60s. The more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh, nah, I don't think I should do that, and I don't think they would let me anyway, so okay, forget it. Went on and did undergraduate in writing and communications. Married my wonderful husband almost 47 years ago. Is that possible? Okay. And we started having our children and building a family, and Mark was working in theater, and I had a sense of call, but I didn't know what to do with it. So at one point, I told Mark that God was calling him to the ministry. And Mark said, yeah, God would call me directly and not use you as an operator. Then I called my dad. And I said, because I wasn't sure if my father would think it was a good idea for his daughter. He has 4 daughters and 1 son at that point. Did he really want his daughter to go into ministry? So I said, Dad, I think what I should do is go to Princeton and get a degree in Christian education. He said, nah, they'll never respect you. And if God is calling you, you need to listen to that call. That took a lot of guts for me to hear that, and I rejoice and give thanks. Because our conversation today, and I'll get to it, is about gratitude. Gratitude for all the people that have come before, that paved the way, that suffered incredible difficulties getting to there, and helping me, those shoulders that I stand on that you can't see and I can't see. But the reason why this is in front of you is a visual reminder of what is not always in the exterior is still embodied in me. And in each of us, all of us, are carrying the ancestors, and all of us are carrying the children and the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, unto the 7th generation. So I had to face up to my own sense of call, and became a postulant in the Diocese of Maryland, and went to Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the 80s. And that was a hotbed of feminist liberation theology and liberation theology across all sorts of groups of people. So I had wonderful conversations, and also, like everybody does when we study theology, incredible difficulty. I had 2 little children when we went to seminary, and then we had 3 when we came home. I had our youngest between my 2nd and senior year in seminary. So I fell asleep a lot during my middler year. And I tried to bring her with me to class during my final year and senior year and hoped she would cry so I could get out of class. But she never cooperated. So I have been working as a Native woman and I was ordained in 1989 and then a priest in 1990. And I have been working in Indigenous Native ministries in the Episcopal Church since before I was ordained. And we sat together for a long time in various different groups and gatherings, realizing that our theological education was not providing anything for our Native leadership. It's not the way we learn. I could talk about it about my own self, but when we sat together, I realized that this is something that's across the board for our Indigenous people. We don't necessarily think like Western theologians. We think about the way we have been brought up, about relationship. Paula Gunn Allen always talks about we wake up in the morning and we don't think, what am I going to do today? but who do I need to take care of? Who am I responsible for? We never see ourselves as an individual. I mean, and I don't mean we lose ourselves, but we think about our responsibility at all times. So as we had these conversations throughout our, across various different tribes and groups, we decided that maybe we should start some sort of training for Native people and do it in a very different way than we've done before. But we'd probably need a couple people with PhDs so we could legitimize the work, right? Okay, well, that's one big mistake. Okay. So I said, okay, and I applied here to Princeton in 1994. I don't know if any of you who have been engaged in the PhD program here, but there's about 400 to 500 applicants a year, and they take 16. At least at that point, they were doing that. I was admitted here. I was welcomed here in just shortly after my dad passed. And I was very honored, and I'm very torn because I wanted to share that with him. You have to understand that my dad used to come back here, bring us with him. I ran barefoot in all sorts of places and made all sorts of trouble, even in the chapel as a child. So I had a sense of home here, or so I thought. When I came here, I started my PhD work, and as some of you know, you have to qualify in German and French. Both are really useful to Native people. And so our dean said it was okay if I took one language and replaced it with Cherokee. So they actually allowed me to qualify in Cherokee at the time. Carol Lackey Hess was my advisor, and she was very much an advocate for me. And we worked really hard together. She was sort of on the outs with the administration because she was a little bit too edgy for that period of time. And I worked really hard, got to the point of, and at this point I had been serving in the Diocese of Pennsylvania and then moved to the Diocese of Delaware. Finished my exams, beginning to start the work of doing my research, my PhD research. And I was called into the office over at Tennant, where Christian Ed was at the time. And my two professors, two of the three, not Carol Lackey Hess, because I had found out that day that they had not granted her tenure. They looked at me and said, "You have too much passion for the program, so we're having you exit the program." Ew? Yeah, well, that's a good way to describe it. I gotta say, I wasn't terribly grateful at that moment. But in that time, I learned a lot more about what was going on, how institutions can be very political and very anxious. I mean, we can talk about being Christians, but we can also talk about how in human situations, we are often protecting ourselves. So I graduated here with a second master's in Christian education in 1998. And I heard my dad say something echoing in my head, "They will not respect you." And yet, very quickly thereafter, folks who worked and studied at the University of Delaware said, "Why don't you come over here? You can do this work here." I started my PhD studies all over again, but I studied with all the policy wonks in the Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute is now called, and the area I was studying is now the Biden Institute in public policy. But the thing I'm grateful for is that the faculty there they didn't care about theology. They didn't care about the rules of learning theology. When I was studying here at one point, the phone rang. Before I graduated from here, my youngest, who at that point was 6 or 7 years old, answered the phone, and obviously they had asked for me, and she said, my mother can't come to the phone. She's reading Schleiermacher. And I was trying to decolonize theology, and I didn't even have words for it. And I recognized that my policy wonk professors didn't care what I did with theology. And I was grateful for the freedom to be able to look at how we do what we do in leadership, how we do what we do in how we raise up our leaders in Native communities. It is never an individualistic call. It is always a call from the community. It is always a place of being pushed forward and going, no, I'm not ready. It is everybody together saying those things. And for those of you who are not in the Episcopal Church, we have very complicated commission on ministries and, hoops. And it's as close to Byzantine structure as you could ever possibly imagine. Although I know the Presbyterian system is not too much different. And so we build these structures to keep people back. But in our communities, we are about pushing those who we know can be our spiritual leaders, our elders, forward. That you are called and we want you to learn. So I had the opportunity, and my gratitude is unending, to go and sit with people in northern Manitoba, and in St. Paul in Minnesota, South Dakota and North Dakota, folks in Alaska, and even with the Maoris in New Zealand, and the Native people in Hawaii. And I got to listen to what their needs were. One of my favorite moments when I was in New Zealand was I had gone to the college, theological college in New Zealand, St. John's, takes the entire staff, faculty, and student body at the beginning of the year out to the marae, which is their traditional place. And they spend 3 or 4 days together, and the marae is big buildings, and everybody sleeps in the same big building, so it's quite a noisy evening of sleep. But we get to hear the stories of the people, and we get to hear the music and the food and listen and hear all of the things that were being shared. And that night, it just happened that that coming weekend was the haka competition, and you've probably all seen it now on various different places, but it's a very beautiful but also very physical activity. And they sing beautifully. They sing in 4-part, maybe 8-part harmony. It's incredibly powerful. It's late at night. I'm on the other side of the world. And we're sitting outside, and they're performing. And I'm sure I hear the music of I Did It My Way. It's in Maori, but it's I Did It My Way. I was pretty sure I was having a nervous breakdown. Until the very next song, I'm sure, is the melody of the Bridge Over Troubled Water. And I thought, okay, this is what stress does. This is what theological education can do. Yeah. I'm just going to go home, roll up in a ball. A couple days later, I'm out with a bunch of young people in their 20s, early 20s, driving me around. They're kidding and they're laughing. So I finally got my courage together and said, okay, I've got a really stupid question, but I need to know. And I told them the story about these 2 songs, and they laughed, and they laughed. They said, oh, that's so Maori. And I went, okay, explain that to me. What do you mean? Well, we find stuff that's really, really good, that we really like, and we make it our own. We steal it, okay? And what I took away from that is we are all part of living culture. We all borrow from one another. Cecilia is talking about is this thing that we do that's so reciprocal we don't even know that we're doing it. It becomes part of us. And even though we may be different in language and culture and space, we are still embedded in this earth and in our God and in the whole of creation, and we keep trying to pull back and say, well, we're different. But in fact, we all steal, as they said, from one another. We cannot grow, function, learn without one another. In my whole time of studying, what I learned the most is that everything needs to be about relationship. Relationship, relationship, relationship. If somebody needs to walk slowly, we'll walk slowly. If somebody needs to run fast, we'll run fast. But everybody in between needs to come along. And we cannot leave any behind. When I was here at Princeton, there was an awful lot of talk. It was the age of neo-orthodoxy. That was the big thing, right? And it was all about I and thou, me and God. But in fact, as Native people, our theology is not you and them, me and God. It is all about us. We learn God through our mothers, our fathers, our sisters, our brothers, our children. The children, our ancestors, and those we cannot see yet, the ones we don't know yet, but are coming. God is in the midst of those relationships, holy and messy simultaneously, really scary, and also very profound. One of the things about the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee story, is that the president of Princeton Seminary, actually I think they called him dean at that point, the president of the United States came to visit. And the President of the United States had just decided to remove all the tribes in North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee. They thought there was going to be gold in those hills. I don't know if you know about this, but they had taken a case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court had voted in favor of the Cherokee people. And Jackson said, I don't care. They're going. The president of Princeton Seminary at that point said, because he came to visit, the president of the United States came to visit in those days, horse and buggy kind of thing. He came down from his carriage, and the president of Princeton Seminary, this seminary, said, get back. You're not staying here. So even though there are times in the history of this place that have not been prophetic, there have been those in my life, whether they're recent or ancient, who have stood up against those who would crush other people, those who would take land. Remember the scripture in Exodus when God says, I hear the cry of my people and I'll give them a land flowing with milk and honey? This is the scripture that was read on the boats that came over with all this colonial folks, the settlers. They, in their mind, were the people of Israel. They were taking over a land from Canaanites and Jebusites. And it was ordained by God. And we know that there were people here. We are those people. And yet, how easy it is for us to forget that. How easy it is to push other people, other beings, and make them a commodity, to push them aside and use them rather than be in relationship to them. I have a great-great-great-grandmother, Sally, who walked the Trail of Tears. She was about 12. In her hand, she had a New Testament and Psalms the American Bible Society had translated, and she had a hymnal in Cherokee, and I still have that. My mother gave that to me. And it reminds me that despite all that the world can dish out, you are here on this particular night to say, we can together, we can't do it alone, but we can together change the trajectory of our present and our future. We can make welcome women and men. We can make welcome And more than just, come on in and sit at my table, but become a community bigger than our isolation. One of our biggest dangers in this time, in this space, is our isolation, our willingness to hide behind screens and gates, and it is the worst kind of theology we can do. God is not in those screens, folks, even though many of you probably studied for the past year and a half on a screen. God is fully embodied. Father, Son, Mother, Father, Holy Spirit. God is embodied in not only the human beings, but the two-legged and the four-legged and the winged, and in the trees and in the rocks and the beauty that we often take for granted. My people were removed from their homeland and that beautiful hills and mountains that are just lush and green to the state of Oklahoma, or Oklahoma Indian Territory at that point, most of which is not green. They ended up in the northeast part of the state, and they learned to rebuild their lives and to make a new home. Up until the 1970s, everything traditional we did was outlawed, and many other states had these same things on the books until the 70s. So many of our people did all of our ceremonial things after midnight. My mother talks about being in a old beat-up pickup truck with the lights off, driving out to an undisclosed location so that they could celebrate green corn or a variety of other different things that we would do. The gratitude I have for people who are willing to be more than conquerors. You know that piece from Romans that Paul says, don't agree a lot with Paul, but I gotta say, we are more than conquerors. For those of us who are indigenous, we know what conquistadors are. And we know that God is calling us to be more than conquerors, and not to turn around and conquer others, but to make them family, to make them the community, to learn from them. Cecilia has talked about going out and getting to know our neighbors. And it's something all of us need to be doing every day, all the time. There is no simple way to do this. There's no course you can take, I'm sorry to say. But willing to sit and listen and hear. Listen to the words that are said. When our people were walking the Trail of Tears, people in the states along that trail, and many, many people died, heard hymns in the Cherokee language. I know that. Why are those people singing those things? For many years, and up until recent generations, many of our Native people have had to really be underground with their identity. And so when I talk to people in Boston and in New York and in DC, people will say, well, there aren't any Native people here. Yeah, there are about 50,000 in the state of Massachusetts and pretty much across the East Coast and in New Jersey. Yes, there are Native people in New Jersey. We go to the Lenape Powwow in Cape May every year with our friends. And we have made friends across various different tribes. One of the things that happened in this country, all of our tribes on the East Coast, for the most part, including those tribes that Owl is from and the tribes that he was speaking of, all had treaties with the Crown and were instrumental in many positive, wonderful things that happened early on contact. And yet, we became enemy combatants during the revolution. We were no longer seen as co-workers, colleagues, or any of those things because we had treaties with the Crown. So all of our tribes on the East Coast never got reservation land, never got anything because the federal government thought we didn't deserve it. But we're still here, and we're resilient. And it's not in an arrogant way, but it's an invitation for all of us to realize hidden among all of us are people who we are standing on their shoulders. Even if you can't see it from the outside, there are people among you who are carrying on the stories, carrying the life, carrying, and what we say is carrying on for the 7th generation yet unborn, to bring the positive changes. Now, many people will ask me, how can you be Christian and Native too? My people had been Christian for at least 3 generations, maybe 4, before they were forced marched across the country. I don't know anything different. I would have to deny part of myself. When I was a child, my father used to call us his little savages, and we'd call him the Great White Father. Not because he was rude about us or we him, but that realizing that part of what we can do for each other is hold this enormous amount of pain lightly and carry it together, and to realize that the gift of our multiplicity is God's gift, not ours. It's the gift that God continually keeps giving and says, please see it for what it is. Please hold on to it, honor it. If we would but do that with our environment, if we would but do that with the people that we work with, if seminaries would make space for difference, God's reign could break through. God's reign could be seen in our time, and maybe we will not see it. I hear a little bit echo of Martin Luther King Jr., but we're still going to get there together. We're still going to be there together. So I want to end by singing you a familiar hymn. This is one of the problems of being a PK. When I was in kindergarten, we were going around in a circle on the little, sit around and have conversations. So the kid next to me, they were asked what our fathers did, and his father owned a grocery store, and I said, my dad owned a church. But I think sometimes when we forget words, sometimes when we forget what we can do, it is the music, the ancient music, that regrounds us, holds us like a mother, a father, a sibling, that helps us to see God when we are struggling in those dark places. And it goes like this. You probably know it, but not in this language. O ne lana heu eji igaguya hei anoyeti yodulena udanene utse. Thank you.